There were 14 people crammed into a district office in Udon Thani, Thailand, on a Tuesday morning, and I was the only one in the room who didn't speak the language being used to decide the rest of my life. My hands were shaking signing a form I couldn't read a word of. A clerk was stamping something in triplicate, and beside me stood a woman named Bao, 33 years old, in a simple cream dress. Squeezing my hand so hard I nearly said something about it. I was 66. She was 33. And in about 4 more minutes we were going to be legally married, and I remember thinking, in that exact moment, nobody prepared me for how ordinary this would feel, and how enormous it would feel, both at the same time. If you're new here, welcome and hit subscribe, because this channel is exactly for moments like this one, the parts of retiring abroad that don't fit neatly into anybody's highlight reel. Today I want to walk you through what actually happens when a man my age marries a woman half his age in Thailand. Because I've read the comments on other people's videos, I know what people assume, and I promise you the real version is stranger, harder, and better than the story people already have in their heads. Let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before any of this, so you can understand why this wasn't some midlife crisis with a passport stamp. I'm from Spokane, Washington. I spent 34 years as a civil engineer, mostly bridges and water systems, the kind of work that's invisible until it fails. I was married once, young, for 11 years, no kids, and it ended quietly and sadly the way some marriages do, more exhaustion than anger. After that I just worked. I dated occasionally, I built a decent 401k, and somewhere around 63, sitting alone in a condo in Spokane during yet another gray February, I made the decision a lot of you have probably made or are thinking about making, which is that I wasn't going to spend the back half of my life waiting for the weather to improve. I moved to Chiang Mai 3 years before I ever met Bo, purely on the numbers, the way a lot of guys my age do it. Retirement visa, the whole process, 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account, renewed every year. I want to be clear about something right up front, because it matters for what comes later. I was not lonely and hunting when I met her. I'd built a life here already. I had my coffee shop, my little routine, a couple of expat friends, a decent working knowledge of the Songthu roots, a landlord who'd started calling me by my first name instead of the American. I was not the man some of you are picturing, sitting in a bar at midnight with a fistful of baht looking for a rescue mission. I met Bo the most unremarkable way possible. She was teaching a Thai language class 2 evenings a week at a community center near my apartment, the kind of class retirees like me take, because everybody tells you that you should learn the language, and almost nobody actually does it. I was one of 6 students. She had a degree in accounting from Khon Kaen University, worked days at a logistics company, and taught the class in the evenings for extra income, which she was sending most of home to her parents' rice farm outside Udon Thani. For the first 4 months, nothing happened beyond a teacher being patient with a 66-year-old who kept mixing up his tones. I want to say that clearly because it's the part nobody believes. 4 months of just class, of her correcting my pronunciation of the word for rice, which I apparently said wrong in a way that meant something entirely different and much ruder, to everyone's amusement but mine. For the first 4 months, nothing happened beyond a teacher being patient with a 66-year-old who kept mixing up his tones. I want to say that clearly because it's the part nobody believes. 4 months of just class, of her correcting my pronunciation of the word for rice, which I apparently said wrong in a way that meant something entirely different and much ruder, to everyone's amusement but mine. I made that particular mistake in front of the whole class twice before anyone had the heart to fully explain what I'd actually said, and by the 3rd time Bo just put her head down on the desk laughing so hard she couldn't speak, which honestly did more for my confidence than any correct pronunciation ever could have. There was also the week I spent proudly greeting every single person I passed on the street with what I thought was a respectful formal Y, hands pressed high near my forehead, until Bo gently informed me I'd been greeting the noodle cart vendor, a woman roughly my own age, with the gesture normally reserved for monks and royalty, and that she'd probably assumed I was either very devout or slightly concussed. It was a rainstorm that changed things, honestly. One evening after class, the rain came down so hard the whole street flooded ankle deep in about 10 minutes, the kind of tropical downpour you don't get in Spokane, and we ended up stuck under the awning of a closed shop for almost an hour, just talking. Actually talking. Not about tones and vocabulary, but about her father's health, my ex-wife, the bridge I was proudest of building, her dream of eventually opening her own accounting firm. I remember standing there getting sprayed by runoff, 66 years old, feeling something I hadn't felt with that kind of sharpness in over a decade. I want to address the thing everybody's already thinking, because I'd rather say it myself than have you sit there wondering if I'm going to. Yes, I know what the assumption is. Older Western man, younger Thai woman, and the whole internet has already written the story before you've even heard my version of it. I'm not going to pretend that story doesn't exist, because it does. Plenty of times over, and I've met some of those couples myself here. Arrangements more transactional than anything I'd call a marriage. But I'm also not going to let that story be told about mine. Because it isn't true, and I think the laziness of that assumption is itself one of the things nobody tells you about. How much you have to be prepared to be quietly. Constantly misjudged by strangers who've decided they already know your whole situation from a 30-second video. My daughter from my first marriage, Amanda, is 34. 1 year older than Bo. I called her the week after that rainstorm, mostly to talk it through out loud with somebody, and there was a very long silence on the line before she said, "Dad, she's my age." And I said, "I know, Amanda. Believe me, I've done that math more than you have." It took her a while. It took most of my friends back in Spokane a while. A guy I'd known since college, Pete, actually stopped returning my emails for almost 6 months. I don't blame any of them for the initial reaction. I'd have raised an eyebrow too, watching from the outside. What I'd ask anybody watching this to consider is that the outside view and the inside view are very rarely the same story. Comment down below if you've ever had people back home question a relationship of yours that they didn't fully understand, because I'd genuinely like to know how common that experience is, and how you handled it. Here's where I have to get into the parts nobody puts in the highlight reel, because this is where the real education happened, and it wasn't romantic, it was administrative and financial, and occasionally humbling. The first thing was sinsod, which is the traditional dowry paid to the bride's family, and I want to explain this properly because Western guys get it wrong constantly. It is not buying a wife, whatever the crude version you've heard online says. It's a gesture of respect toward the parents who raised her, and a public signal, in front of the whole community, that you can provide for their daughter. Bo's father and I sat down, through her as translator, and negotiated an amount, and I mean negotiated. This wasn't a price tag. It was a conversation about respect and family and what was appropriate given both our circumstances. We landed on an amount, and Bao herself, very matter of fact, told me half of it would be shown at the ceremony, and returned to us afterward as a practical matter, which is common practice, and something I never would have known to ask about if she hadn't told me herself. Then there's the legal side, which I'll be honest, I underestimated badly at first. Marriage to a Thai national gets you a marriage visa here, the non-immigrant O, which is genuinely easier than the retirement visa in some ways. You need 400,000 baht in a Thai bank account, about $11,000, held for 2 months before applying, instead of the 800,000 the retirement visa requires. Or you can show a monthly income of about 40,000 baht, roughly $1,100, which some men prefer because it doesn't tie up as much capital sitting idle. I'd already had the retirement visa for 3 years by the time we married, So switching over meant a fresh round of paperwork, bank letters, our marriage certificate translated and legalized. A whole afternoon at the immigration office in Chiang Mai, where I sat beside a Frenchman going through the identical transition for his own Thai wife, the two of us swapping notes like men comparing tax forms. And it doesn't end at the wedding, either. Every 90 days I still report my address to immigration, married or not, exactly as I did on the retirement visa, and every year we go through the renewal again. Fresh bank statements, fresh photos. Proof to a government official that the marriage is still in the eyes of the state a going concern. It's not hard once you know the choreography of it. It's just relentless in a way nobody mentions when they're only showing you the wedding photos. But here's the part that surprised me most. The part I'd tell any man considering this before he considers anything else. As a foreigner, I cannot own land in Thailand. Not with a marriage visa, not with any visa. If Bo and I buy a piece of land, it goes in her name. Full stop. No exceptions. No workaround that a good lawyer would actually recommend. I can own a house, the structure itself, jointly, but the ground underneath it will always legally belong to her. I sat with a Thai family lawyer in Chiang Mai for 2 hours going through this, and he told me something I now repeat to every guy who asks me about marrying here. He said, "Mr. Michael, you are not protecting yourself from your wife. You are protecting the both of you from the situation." We ended up registering a usufruct, a lifetime right to use and live on the property, on the piece of land Bo's name is on. Which means if something happens to her before me, I can't be forced out of my own home by relatives. But I also will never own that dirt, not for one day of my life. And I had to make total peace with that before we ever signed anything. We also did a prenuptial agreement, and I know that word makes some people flinch, like it's an insult wrapped in a contract. But Bo was the one who actually suggested it before I did. She sat across from me at that same lawyer's office and said, in English good enough that I know she meant every word precisely, "Michael, I don't want your money to ever be a question between us. I want it written down, so it's never a question." I have never in my life respected a woman more than I did in that exact sentence. We spelled out what stayed separate, what would be shared, what would happen to my retirement accounts if I predeceased her, which, given the math of a 66-year-old marrying a 33-year-old, is a conversation you cannot avoid, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. I also sat down, separately, with an estate lawyer back in Washington State, because a Thai prenup doesn't automatically mean anything to an American court, and I wanted a will on both sides of the Pacific that said the exact same thing in 2 languages and 2 legal systems, so nobody, not my daughter, not Bao, not some probate judge, would ever have to guess what I meant. I added her to my health insurance situation as best I could, though international coverage for a much younger spouse turned out to be its own maze. Cheaper for her than it will ever be for me, which is its own strange arithmetic to sit with, knowing my premiums will keep climbing every year while hers barely move. A permanent reminder written into an insurance quote of exactly how many years separate us. And then there's the money that flows the other direction, which almost nobody mentions on camera because it makes people uncomfortable. Bo sends a portion of her own income, and now some of our shared income, to her parents' farm every month, to her younger brother's school fees, to a cousin's motorbike repair, to whatever comes up. This is not a Thai woman draining an American retiree. Whatever the ugliest version of that stereotype wants you to believe. This is how family works here. Full stop. An obligation as automatic and unquestioned as breathing. The same way I'd have helped my own daughter with a down payment without a second thought back in Spokane. The difference is the scale of the need, and the directness of the asking. Nobody in Eisen is shy about saying we need help with this, and the first 6 months, that bluntness genuinely rattled me, an American raised to treat money as a private, careful, slightly shameful topic. I had to learn, actually learn, The way you learn a language. That this wasn't a red flag. It was just a different operating system for what family means. The wedding day itself, the one I opened with, was smaller than either of our families back home probably pictured. A monk blessing at 7 in the morning, chanting in Pali that I understood not one syllable of but felt anyway. In my chest, the way you feel a bass line before you understand the song. White string tied around both our wrists by every relative in attendance. One after another. This quiet parade of beaux, aunts, and uncles, blessing us in sequence. Each one pressing a few baht into an envelope in a small basket by the door. Not as payment for anything. Just the same instinct that makes an American grandmother slip a 20 into a card. Then the trip to the AMFR, the district office, for the legal registration, which is the part that actually counts under Thai law. The part where I signed a document I couldn't read, and felt the whole weight of what I was doing land on me at once. Beau's mother cried. My own mother, 89 years old, watched the whole thing over a shaky video call from a nursing home in Spokane, and afterward said to me, in this small, tired voice, Michael, she has kind eyes. That's all I ever wanted to know. That undid me more than the ceremony itself did. I won't pretend the skepticism stopped at the wedding. It's an ongoing tax, honestly. One I've made peace with paying. There's a particular flavor of comment I get on videos like this one. Guys typing some version of enjoy it while it lasts, or wait till the money runs out. And for a long time those comments actually got under my skin. What changed my relationship to them wasn't defending myself online. It was a conversation with an older expat friend here, an Englishman named Roger, who's been married to his own Thai wife for 19 years. He told me, Michael, strangers on the internet have never once had to sit across a table and actually build a life with anybody. Let them have their theory. You have the marriage. I think about that more than almost anything else anyone's told me since I got here. The day-to-day of it, which is really the whole point, isn't nearly as exotic as the premise makes it sound. Beau gets up earlier than me, always has, makes coffee, and we sit on the little terrace together most mornings, before either of us has said much of anything, which is its own kind of intimacy I didn't expect at this stage of life. She corrects my Thai constantly, still, 3 years later, and I correct her English idioms with equal enthusiasm, and neither of us takes it personally anymore. We argue about ordinary things, whose turn it is to deal with the landlord, whether we're spending too much helping her brother, the same textures of friction any married couple has, just conducted partly in a second language for both of us. Her friends, mostly women her own age, treat me with this specific blend of teasing affection and genuine warmth that took me a long time to trust as real, because I kept waiting for the catch that Roger eventually convinced me wasn't coming. Roger himself has become something like an older brother in this whole arrangement, even though he's 4 years younger than me, simply because he's already lived 19 years of the questions I was only starting to ask. He's the one who told me, early on, not to be surprised when Beau's mother started calling me son within the first year, because in his experience the in-laws often accept the foreign husband faster and more completely than his own countrymen back home ever will, precisely because family here isn't graded on how the marriage started, only on how you show up for it afterward. 6 months ago her father had a stroke, a real one, and I watched Beau become someone I hadn't fully seen yet, organizing his care, negotiating with the hospital, holding her whole family together through 3 genuinely terrifying weeks, while I mostly stood beside her handing her water and staying quiet, which turned out to be the correct job. I paid for the private room upgrade without being asked to, and without it being a topic of discussion between us, because that's simply what a husband does in this family, the same as I'd have done for my own father without a second thought. Watching her at his bedside, exhausted, translating his slurred speech for the doctors at 2 in the morning. I understood something about who I'd actually married, that no amount of dating beforehand could have shown me. You learn who somebody is in the hospital corridor, not the honeymoon. If I could go back and tell myself one thing before any of this started, it wouldn't be about the visa paperwork or the land laws, even though I've spent this whole video walking you through exactly that, because you do need to know it cold before you sign anything here. It would be this. The age gap is the least interesting fact about this marriage, and it took me embarrassingly long to actually believe that myself. Amanda flew out to see us last spring, 4 years after that first phone call, where she went quiet on the line, and I watched her and Bo stay up until 2 a.m. at our kitchen table, the two of them a year apart in age, laughing over something on Bo's phone, and at one point my daughter looked over at me and said, "Dad, I get why. I still think about the math sometimes, but I get why." That sentence did more to settle me than anything a lawyer or an immigration officer ever stamped. What's interesting is learning, at 66, that you can still be someone's actual partner instead of just somebody's story. And that the hardest, most honest work of it happens nowhere near a wedding altar. It happens at 2 a.m. in a hospital hallway in a language that still isn't fully yours. I'm Michael. Thank you for listening to Retirement Without Borders.